biggest climate strike ever in history, and we all should be so proud of ourselves because we have done this together. So thank you so much.
One thing you should always keep in mind: if you want people to change, you must first change yourself. You have to lead by example. You see, that's the key. You have to be the change that you wish to see. You got to be the change you wish to see. There is no combination to the lock, so here's the key. You got to be the change you wish to see in this world. Yeah, I got to be the change I wish to see. There is no combination to the lock, but here's the key. I got to be the change I wish to see in this world. Yeah, a lot of people on this earth expect change in others, but they're never willing to change themselves first. And that's a problem if you think about it. You can't control what people do, and that's why you got to be about it. Be the change that you...
Welcome to Becoming the Change. I have a confession to make. Sometimes it's really hard to hold on to hope, and yet we must, because hope helps fuel the fight for a better future. Hope is what makes that future possible. On the heels of Hurricane Ian, holding on to hope can be especially difficult for those on the front lines, and for many who have been begging their leaders to change the system that has created climate, environmental, and water crises around the globe. Issues that are also coming to a head in Florida. I want to give special thanks to today's guests who showed up to speak with me in the wake of Hurricane Ian. My hope lies in conversations like these, that they might reach someone like you, and that you can help us bring about the system change that could hopefully help create a brighter future for our children. Hi. You just saw two very powerful clips from filmmaker and waterkeeper Casey Schulberg, who's doing really amazing work in the state of Florida, helping to protect our waterways and helping to communicate these very important issues that we are currently facing in this state. I hope they help give a very good, solid context about the issues that we're about to dive in today. Unfortunately, Casey is unable to be included in the actual conversation due to some technical issues. But we're going to go ahead and dive in, and very grateful for the content that he helped contribute to all of this. And we'll see if we can retrieve those files into the future. Thank you so much. And let's go ahead and dive in and start asking some questions from Larry Brand about the health implications of the current water crisis in Florida while we are all on the heels of Hurricane Ian. Thank you.
I'm a big Gulf swimmer. I love to swim. It's my passion. And I swam several times, and I swim underwater and love every second of it. And had a happy weekend, but about 10 days later, suddenly in the morning, I was getting ready to go to work, and my left arm started hurting me greatly. So I asked my daughter to come over for lunch, and when she came over, I said, you know, I don't feel good. I think you need to take me to the emergency room. So she drove me to Gulf Coast Hospital, and by the time I got there, my left arm was totally paralyzed, and my right arm was paralyzed, and I couldn't stand or walk. At first they thought I was a stroke victim, and then they quickly realized it was not a stroke. And I got great care at the hospital, by the way. Gulf Coast Hospital, I had wonderful care. That's not the issue. The issue is, a few days after I was in the hospital, I noticed the news media was saying red tide's coming down from Boca Grande. And that's right where we were, off of Cayo Costa. I told the neurologists, I believed I got it from red tide. The doctors, the nurses, they dismissed me. Really didn't want to talk about it. I pursued it. And not until I was out of the hospital and back for my neurologist check did the neurologist finally agree with me that, yes, you were a victim of red tide.
My family worries about me. I struggle. You know, my friends, everybody, you know, I think it's crazy. You know, a guy that's capable of making the kind of money I make after having a long career of not making anything and then kind of making it and then doing very well and really prospering, you know, and not only the money, think about how much I love this. I love this. I love this. And, you know, to not go out every day, you know, what it comes down to is there's guys that'll go out and, you know, never skip a beat and don't worry about this kind of stuff. But me, knowing what I have, there's no way that I'm going to explain to him on a deathbed years and years earlier than I should be why I made the decisions I made for money. There's never going to come a time where I have to explain to you that that's what I did, because I'm going to be right here with you.
So, Larry, can you unmute for a second and then speak to the ways that these algae blooms affect human health?
Sure. So there's a lot of species that can produce a variety of toxins, and a lot of different toxins. So some of them are, a common one is causing gastrointestinal disorders, which can be very unpleasant. Quite a few of them are also neurotoxins. In fact, the Florida red tide on the west coast here in Florida is a very familiar one to many people. And the familiar symptom you get is the fact that the toxin gets in the air and acts as a neurotoxin and basically causes respiratory distress. Your eyes start to water and you start coughing, etc. If you have asthma on the other hand, you could get really serious respiratory problems. You usually end up at the hospital. Indeed, you can just look at the hospital records during times of red tide on the West Coast, and you'll see about a 50% increase in people going to the hospital for respiratory distress during times of red tide. So it has a huge impact on the local residents as well as the tourists and the tourist industry. But if you eat, say, the clams that have been filter feeding on the red tide, and the clams like the red tide, and that toxin doesn't affect their nerves, it just affects ours. And if you eat those clams, then they accumulate these toxins, and you can get really, really sick, coming close to death by eating those clams.
So, what are the warning signs? I mean, how do we know how to avoid these things? I mean, if you live near an algae bloom, and you're breathing the air, it would seem to me there's basically nothing you can do other than move or go someplace else. But what kind of you can choose not to eat the seafood. So how do
Right.
people know what to avoid to try to keep themselves safe?
Okay, in terms of the aerosol, and you breathe that toxin in, it's going to sound a little odd, but I'm going to call that a good toxin because you know right away you're being exposed to it. So if you're walking along the beach and you get hit with what's effectively a tear gas or nerve gas, you know you're being exposed, and so you walk away. Okay. The problem is if you eat the clams, you don't know ahead of time that those clams have got the red tide toxin in them. On the other hand, though, we actually have a good system here in Florida now. The state does monitor for the presence of red tide organisms in our coastal waters. So during times of red tide, they do actually put out signs closing off all basically shutting down all shellfish harvesting. So that's actually very rare that you actually get toxic clams anymore. They also monitor for, using satellite imagery and so on. They do monitor for the presence of red tides, and so they have a system where newspapers report it. You go online and find out. So tourists can find out. You can sort of predict reasonably well where that red tide is going to move. Once you have a red tide out there, it's being moved around by the currents and tides. And so they have computer models to predict where it's going to be. So you can sort of predict which beach it's going to be on. So you can find out which are going to be the clean beaches and which are going to be the red tide beaches on a day-to-day basis. Okay. The problem is some of these toxins, you have no early symptoms. You can't smell it, taste it, or even have early gastrointestinal disorders, but they have long-term damages, such as some of them generate liver cancer and other types of cancer. And some we now believe can lead to neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. And these kind of things, you don't know you've been exposed at the time, but then 10 or 20 years later, you come down with Alzheimer's, something like this. Those are the really insidious toxins because you really can't do anything about it ahead of time. You have no idea you're being exposed to it.
Wow. Now, how knowledgeable are doctors about this too? I mean, can they spot the signs of poisoning?
A few can, but most of them do not. I've talked to the medical doctors. It's really not a part of medical training for the most part. Now, some doctors are aware of this. One type of toxin we have here in Florida is ciguatera. And again, a lot of times it's misdiagnosed by doctors, but a few do know what it is. But unfortunately, a lot of them do not.
How many different varieties are there? You're talking about red tide for one thing, and then
there's lots of others. There's probably at least over 50 different species that produce toxins. Now, not all here in Florida, but around the world, at least 50, probably at least 100. And I suspect even a lot more because while we know of some toxins, undoubtedly there's a lot of others we have not discovered yet. I won't go into reasons why, but it's good reason to believe there's a lot of other undiscovered toxins that are out there still. Now, actually, if you see an algal bloom, even if you use current techniques and measure it, and the state says, "Oh, we don't see any toxins," well, they're only measuring a few toxins. They're only measuring maybe the presence of 5 or 6 different toxins, but there's a lot of others out there that are not being measured, and a lot of them we don't know about. So even if you see an algal bloom that you suspect is not toxic, I would not make that assumption. If you see an algal bloom, you certainly definitely don't want to drink that water or swim in it. And I would not eat any of the fish and other seafood in those waters either.
Now, one of the things I saw in Casey's documentary is he was talking about how often these things are not marked. So people don't know to avoid fishing or even swimming in an area if it hasn't been marked. I'm assuming perhaps that has improved a little bit over the past several years, or not?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I do quite a bit of sampling throughout South Florida. I've sampled A lot of blooms all along, Lake Okeechobee, Clusatchie River, and various places. And I don't remember ever seeing a warning sign in these places where I've actually collected algal blooms.
Now, are there things people can do to help put this on the radar of officials if they're noticing that there's an algal bloom someplace? So what should someone do?
Well, I guess they can get on social media, and maybe, I guess, probably, alert, say, local radio stations and newspapers, maybe, and hope that they would alert the public.
That's interesting. I mean, you would think that there would be some other place where we might be able to call and they would say, okay, we're going to go out there, we're going to put up a sign, and we're going to make sure that we protect our citizens from this. It sounds a little willy-nilly to just try to get the word out.
They do it to some extent with red tide. But for all these other algal blooms we're getting here in South Florida, I don't really see too much.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. Do you think that there's anything else that we should know to help protect people from toxic algae blooms, things that they should generally be aware of, and warning signs if they can't see it right away?
Well, if you see, really dark water, like, green water and so on, that's an algal bloom. And, it's just best to be safe than sorry and just avoid those blooms. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Larry. So, what's really astounding to me is that a lot of this just seems very senseless because we've got alternatives. We've got better ways to do things and we're not doing them. So I want to take a moment as an example of that to watch another clip from Kiss the Ground. And they talk about the interrelationship between climate, agriculture, and water. And they explain beautifully some of the solutions that there are for us when it comes to dealing with these issues. So here we go. We're going to take a moment and watch the soil story.
Do you feel hopeless about climate change and the damage we are doing to our planet? I did. But then I was shown a new way to look at the problem, which made the solution so obvious and so within reach. A solution that's right under our feet. Climate change is all about too much carbon in our atmosphere. But carbon's not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it. It's us. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools of where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants appeared on land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool. Then we burned it for energy, putting it into play, disrupting that balance. The way we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon from the soil and biosphere into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. Now the oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, which is resulting in ocean acidification and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. So in order to save life as we know it, of course, we have to stop releasing fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put this excess carbon to get this cycle back into balance? Well, remember when I said that the solution is right under our feet? It literally is. It's the soil. Plants, with sunlight and water, perform photosynthesis. They pull in carbon from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of those sugars down through their roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build soil. Voila! Carbon moved. Plants pump it in and soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost sets up an ongoing positive feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. In concert with other regenerative practices like not tilling the soil, planting trees, cover crops, and planned grazing, we can build and retain gigatons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. And there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Unlike more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil, which is nutrient rich, full of life, and holds way more water. This means more nutritious food and crops that are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for farmers, families, and everyone that eats. Remember this: the way we grow our food, fiber, and fuel either puts carbon up into the atmosphere or it pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of our soils, and the health of our planet are one and the same.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to Christy Folk. Christy, you got to work on some composting issues for a while. Now, for decades, majority of the climate action focus has been around the need to get off of fossil fuels, which we absolutely need to do. I mean, we should have done it quite a long time ago, as we're seeing by the amplification of the climate crisis. But we can't ignore the other greenhouse gas sources that are on the ground that we've been contributing to. So as we saw, industrial agriculture has also played a really huge role. Not just animal agriculture, but also the way that we're growing produce. How does chemical nitrogen fertilizer compare with carbon dioxide when it comes to the impact on our climate?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this a bit before, but when those synthetic nitrogen fertilizers run off, they enter the waterways, they deplete the water of oxygen through eutrophication, and then those decaying plants then release carbon dioxide. So they are contributing to, the climate change through the release of greenhouse gases. And then also that carbon dioxide gets dissolved in the water and contributes to acidification. So it's all connected. And so the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer does also impact the climate.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me how, majority of the framing out there is all focused on carbon dioxide, but we've got so many other really impactful greenhouse gases that we also need to deal with. And nitrogen is certainly up there. I believe the impact is worse than carbon dioxide, if I remember correctly. I wish I had the statistic about just that when it comes to going into the atmosphere and how they compare. And as we mentioned before, they do get into our waterways, which have all these other horrible impacts on the food system, on our biodiversity. And of course, the source of life is in the water. We can't go about decimating life in the water and think it's not going to end up coming back to us in terms of the existence of, people when it comes to how we fit in with these larger ecosystems. So we know that some of these are coming through our waterways, through Okeechobee and through agriculture, industrial agriculture. But who else is involved in that chain of using these kinds of toxic fertilizers and having this impact on climate and our waterways as a result? Where else can we look in terms of where the changes need to happen?
Yeah, and one thing that comes to my mind when you say that is our lawns. So this idea that we need to have a lawn, a monoculture of grass, um, is something that takes a lot of pesticides and fertilizers to keep up, and it's not natural to have to maintain a monoculture of this basically useless plant on your front lawn. Of course, it's a status symbol and everything, and there's the history associated with that, but it also takes a huge amount of water in the form of irrigation to upkeep a lawn. And so one of the sources of those fertilizers is just grass, like lawns that have to be maintained, and there are movements to try to replace lawns with things like gardens. In Orlando, there's the organization Ideas for Us that started a program called Fleet Farming that transforms front lawns into farmlets and gardens, and actually makes that piece of land useful as far as delivering vegetables that people can eat, and it doesn't take up all that water, basically just drains the water as a result of all of the irrigation that monoculture of grass would need. So that's another source.
Awesome. So now the other thing is that I know a lot of people who feel like they need those nitrogen fertilizers in order to grow healthy crops or, support the plants. But I mean, those plants were doing fine before we invented nitrogen fertilizer, right? I mean, so how can we do things better? How can we support growing healthy plants, having that beauty, or, creating our own food, and do it where we have a better way that's not also impacting the climate and our water systems in a negative way?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, these synthetic nitrogen fertilizers were an invention, and they are only a few decades old. They're a result of like these weapons of war that needed to be repurposed. And so before that, we can see practices of organic farming and things like that make use of more organic fertilizers and pesticides. And so things that really take advantage of the symbiotic relationships that we already see between the soil and plants. So things like compost that can amend the soil and provide those nutrients that the plants need without synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And that's really where we want to transition as far as moving away from this industrial scale agriculture that takes advantage of these adverse fertilizers and pesticides, and move towards a more sustainable system of agriculture that takes advantage of the natural systems and the way that nature was meant to work, rather than trying to dominate it with our invention of this nitrogen fertilizer.
Yeah, going into a laboratory to create something that already works really well in a symbiotic way that's respectful of the natural processes. And yeah. And I've heard, this is an area I don't know a whole lot about, but I have definitely heard of people using biochar, probiotics to help replenish the soil, particular versions of rice that help replenish the soil and draw down carbon dioxide. So there seems to be a lot of different options that go beyond synthetic nitrogen fertilizer that help to create healthier soil systems, draw down carbon dioxide, as well as reducing runoff. That's an area that can definitely be explored more deeply by anyone who wants to move toward a more sustainable system for having beautiful, yards and plant life, because for all means, we should support that, right? So Now, one of my favorite statistics that I remember actually from when I worked at the Clio Institute in your position is that if food waste was a country, it would be the world's third largest emitter. And when I heard that, it just completely blew my mind that we're being wasteful and contributing to the climate crisis simultaneously. And that a lot of us haven't realized the impact that has. So why is food waste so bad, and what can we do to avoid it?
Yeah, so this is a really fun thing to talk about because you've got one side, you've got why food waste is absolutely terrible, and there's so many reasons. And then on the other side, you have so many potential benefits of reducing food waste. So food waste is bad for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that there are so many people in our society who are hungry. And for a high income nation like the US, we have such high rates of hunger. And so food waste, food that is wasted that could be eaten, is not going to the people who need it. So that's the first, travesty. The second thing is food waste is terrible because think of all of the inputs that led to that food as a resource that people could be eaten, that could eat, and it's all being wasted. So all of the energy that goes into, growing the food, storing the food, transporting the food, only to have it go bad and be thrown away, right? So all of that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And that's just kind of on the front side of things, right? So when you look at the back side of things, you see that food waste, the vast majority of it going to the landfill. So not only does it get wasted as a resource at the front end, it fills up the landfills. And when food waste gets sent to the landfill, it gets mixed with all the other trash and plastic and everything. And every day they put a layer of dirt over the trash, and that seals in the trash, and it creates these anaerobic conditions. And what happens when you have anaerobic conditions is that things break down and release methane, which we know is a extremely potent greenhouse gas. So not only are you wasting all of the energy and emissions to create the food that doesn't get eaten, but on the backside, then it continues to, emit greenhouse gases in the form of methane in the landfills.
Yeah. How bad is methane as a greenhouse gas as well? How does that compare with carbon dioxide?
Yeah, so methane over its lifetime, over the total overall, is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. But over the first 20 years, it is 86 times as potent. And that's just given that it has a shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide is more harmful. And that's what a lot of people think of because it is the vast majority of what we emit as greenhouse gases. So over 3/4 of what we emit is carbon dioxide. So methane has a much smaller piece of the pie, but it's a lot more potent and it has a lot more global warming potential, it's called, in terms of creating heat and trapping heat. And so some of the recent IPCC reports have said that they've really emphasized the importance of reducing methane in the short term in terms of reducing warming because they have such a potent impact. And as we know, some of the sources of methane are things like landfills and animal agriculture, and then also in the form of fossil fuels like so-called natural gas, fracked gas, which is mainly comprised of methane. So there's a lot of different sources of methane that people probably aren't as aware of in comparison to things like carbon dioxide. But it is an area of really important consideration for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah. So the thing that really blows my mind about methane, and especially in relationship to what little attention we have largely been putting on it for a long time, is that it's the front end warming that ends up opening up feedback loops that lead to more warming. So if you're having something that's 86, 100 times, several hundred times, in the first year or something like that, who knows what else that's leading to So it seems it's really incalculable what the impact of methane is because of feedback loops. So, you know, it's just, even though it doesn't last as long, what else is it doing? So anyways, we've got solutions to that, at least when it comes to food waste creating methane, because we can compost it instead. And then we've got benefits associated with that. So, you know, I think you covered this a little bit before in terms of the benefits of composting. But how would someone go about doing that on their own at home? How difficult is it for someone to start composting?
Yeah, it's really not difficult at all. It's kind of daunting because there's like, you can really dig into the roots, so to speak, on the science of soil, but it doesn't have to be that scary. It's pretty basic as far as what you'd put into a compost bin. For example, if you had a backyard, you would just need a container that has some kind of aeration, and then you combine carbon elements, which are called the browns, and the nitrogen elements, which are the greens. So the browns would be things like dead leaves or mulch and paper, and then the greens would be things like vegetable scraps or something like that. And so you could easily create your own backyard composter if you have a backyard. In the city of Orlando, they provide free backyard composters. And so you can do it yourself. If you live in an apartment like me, there are also other options like vermicompost, so worms that will eat through food scraps and things like that. And then there are newer, more exciting technologies coming out, like bokashi is an example of anaerobic fermentation composting, where it's like a little contraption that you have on your kitchen counter and it like breaks down the food scraps. And then there's also things like composting services that can do it for you on a community composting scale. And those are really exciting. And I worked for O-Town Compost, which was Orlando's community composter. And so that's another option if you don't have the time or the interest to actually, you know, do your own composting.
That's wonderful. And I feel like that's a business that other people could take up. I mean, people could do that wherever they live, decide to start a composting business where they pick up compost and, you know, or food waste and turn it into compost and, you know, give it some use to help, you know, create a better system. Excellent. Thank you so much, Christy. Yeah, it seems like big ag is another way that the systems that we've become used to have just failed to protect us. It seems like industry is being given the freedom to pollute our waterways and harm the public health without that accountability, which is just extremely unfortunate. So that's the sort of thing that I want to feel like we can do something to change. It's so great to know that there are things that we can personally do to change this. And some of it seems a bit out of our hands when it comes to these big corporations that are polluting our waterways and creating a source of these really serious problems. Now, fortunately, there is a legal mechanism that could help level the playing fields when it comes to giving people their power back to protect our water and to protect our ecosystems. So our next guest, Carl Deigert, has been working on a way to give that right back to Floridians around the state, the right to protect clean water. So as an introduction for this, I want to go ahead and play another short clip to the film Invisible Hand, produced by my friend Melissa Troutman. Really wonderful film that helps tells the story of this group of citizens that decided to enact the rights of nature in their area to protect their rivers and their waterways, and what happened with them. So let's go ahead and just take a moment and watch this.
I shall share with you a prophecy that was left to us by the peacemaker as he was leaving the Bay of Quinte.
Indigenous people, we are the conscience of this land. We're trying to wake people up.
What you're seeing is really, I think, in the beginnings of an international movement.
En el campo del reconocimiento de la naturaleza como sujeto de derechos es revolucionario.
It's not an environmental movement unless it protects nature as a rights-bearing entity.
What do you say to your critics that say, this is absolutely batshit crazy? Absurd. Can I go now?
We recognize a right that this watershed has had that's long been ignored. Its right to thrive, to flourish.
The out-of-state extremists pushing the Lake Erie Bill of Rights don't care about Toledo.
Tonight, residents are under order not to drink, wash dishes, brush their teeth, or give tap water to their pets, and not to boil it for use.
It is we as man who have strayed from our original instructions.
This is the beginning of a legal system in favor of nature.
Were you aware of the risks and the potential that you were going to be sued and all of that at the time?
We were aware ahead of time that we were indeed going to get sued, but we just went ahead with it.
Either you stand up or you don't.
We don't have an injection well problem, we have a democracy problem.
We have shifted our government to one that's now become totally corporate control.
Capitalism,
it was a magic of the price system.
Hasn't it given us the highest standard of living in the world?
Don't be guilty of that corporate thinking.
If you lived in this area, would you want the injection well in your area?
Okay, next question.
The laws that are in place and the regulations that are in place right now are not working.
We can't rely on our legislatures to protect us.
So you have the corporation, the federal judge, and the State Department of Environmental Protection all crashing down on this community and attempting to get them to submit to the injection well.
I can't support an organization that doesn't believe in true environmental protection. And
if a corporation has the same constitutional rights as an individual, why couldn't an ecosystem?
Don't lose the faith, don't lose the focus. You just have to keep doing it.
It's about the water. It's always been about the water.
Okay. So our next guest is Carl Dygert. Carl has been working on the issues of rights of nature and protecting our water as well. And historically, how have corporate rights been comparing to people's rights when it comes to our legal system? Who actually has the most power at this point? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I believe our democratic process has been replaced by a corporate oligarchy that creates regulations dictating almost every legislative decision. And we're stuck in this framework where we think we need to elect the right guy who thinks like us, go to Tallahassee or go to Washington, D.C. to implement the laws we want them to implement. The problem is when you get that guy that thinks like you into office, they run into a wall of this corporate influences that prevents them from being effective. So I myself was asked to run for state legislature in Florida, and I said yes. And about 2 weeks later, I discovered the Rights of Nature movement and how it works and the processes behind it. And I realized going to Tallahassee as a junior representative, I would be wholly ineffective. And I decided to pursue this, donate all my energy to implementing this process, or introducing this process to the state of Florida.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
I can go on forever. So, our friend Chuck O'Neill in Orange County ramped this through in Orange County, Florida, through a charter amendment process that has to occur in every incorporated city. They have to review their charter so many years. And you can introduce an idea. It could be pink. We want the streets in this town painted pink, or we want to give rights to water, right? So through a ballot initiative, you collect the required number of signatures, and that varies from charter to charter. And when you collect those, some charters allow that initiative to be automatically placed on the ballot. In other places, the commissioners can, even though you've collected the required signatures, they can still deny the voice of the people and not put it on the ballot to be up for a vote. So in Orange County, that occurred. It got on the ballot, and 90% of the voters supported it. 89%. I'd like to round up a little bit. 89% of the voters, that means bipartisan, voted clean water. They did not vote party. They voted clean water. So that happened in 2020, and with the implementation of that law, every water body in that county, in that jurisdiction, had a legal right to exist, flourish, and regenerate. And the people were also given the legal right to step into the shoes of those ecosystems, those water bodies, and become their voice, much like a minor child is voiceless in court. So we're able to represent those waters. So once that law was put into place, there was just one problem. The Florida legislature discovered through the agricultural interest that you heard in Ohio, Lake Erie. They came out really hot and heavy against the Lake Erie Bill of Rights and so the ag community communicates across the nation. And the opposition came out here in Florida. They paid, I'm sure they influenced, I don't want to say paid, but they influenced several legislators to introduce language into the 2020 legislative system to preempt our work, to prevent any other municipality, jurisdiction, government entity from granting natural systems personified rights. So that happened in August of 2020. The Orange County initiative, the law still exists on the books. The people said this is what we want for our community. But so once we had it in place, there was the first enforcement case for the rights of nature in the United States within Orange County against a developer who wanted to tear up a couple hundred acres of wetlands because it was going to impact these 5 water bodies. This got to court, it got to the circuit court, and the judge listened very intently. I attended that. She listened. She was very interested in the argument of why nature should have rights. But she came down on the side of the legislature. And because they had beat us to the punch by a couple of weeks, the preemption was upheld. So no other jurisdiction in the state of Florida can create this law. I can read you the preemption language. The preemption language was stuck into a Senate Bill 712 in 2020. It's entitled the Clean Water Act. So keep that in mind for a second. And then you scroll down to line 2369, and it reads, the Environmental Protection Act. A local government regulation, ordinance, code, rule, comprehensive plan, charter, or any other provision of law may not recognize or grant any legal rights to a plant, an animal, a body of water, or any other part of the natural environment that is not a person or political subdivision as defined in State Statute 1.01, or grant such person or political subdivision any specific rights relating to the natural environment not otherwise authorized in the general law or specifically granted in the Florida State Constitution. So here they snuck in a preemption in the Clean Water Act, basically the antithesis of clean water, as this is this right to these water bodies is the highest level of protections in Western jurisprudence. So, and then they call it the Environmental Protection Act. So you can see how corporate influences, special interests, greenwash their language to basically dupe the public into thinking that they're actually doing something positive for Florida.
Absolutely. I want to backtrack a little bit just to give a little bit more context to all of this, because, you know, Invisible Hand was really eye-opening to me, as well as just working in this field generally. But in terms of the way that our legal system views a corporate right to make a profit over people's right to protect their health and well-being and our ecosystems that sustain life on Earth.
Right.
The fact that the right to make a profit is more protected than all of those people who showed up to the hearings who said, hey, look, we don't want that. We don't want this fracked injection well in our neighborhood because we know that that has negative impacts. We know it destroys our water. We know that that impacts health. We know that that can give us cancer. We don't want it here. And you've got all of these people using their voices, trying to use democratic processes and saying, this is not what we want. But that corporation that was going to make a profit off of land had more protection through our governmental systems.
Yep.
So that's why we needed, you know, the whole concept of shifting to rights of nature, of trying to level the playing field, right? Giving some kind of opposition to that. So that's why I think what you guys are doing is so powerful. And it's fascinating to me that you came in, you had so much support from the democratic process of 89% of the people coming out in Orlando and saying, yes, this is what we want. We don't want you to destroy our rivers and our waterways. Yes, these do have a right to exist so that you can protect them before you poison them, as opposed to having to prove that they were poisoned because of a particular reason when you've got multiple corporations poisoning that body water, for instance. So how can you hold anyone accountable if you've got sources from multiple locations? You know, it makes it more complicated. So this shifting in the way that we think of protecting and preventing harm, as opposed to having to respond once the harm has already happened, is so crucial and so important. But the fact that our Florida government put a label on something that at first sight would look like, oh, sure, we agree with that because they've got a label on it that sounds so benign and sounds so good and like it would be in our best interest. But the actual language of it is exactly the opposite, just like you were saying. It's exactly the opposite of what it's titled. So recognizing that our legal system is not currently structured in a way that will protect basic rights like the right to clean water for individuals. So you guys made a shift as a result of that, because that preemption ended up getting in the way of you being able to use that amendment that was passed democratically to protect the people who wanted it to protect them. So that's our Florida government that did that. There are people that were elected by us that said, you're not allowed to say what you want. We're not going to pay attention to that. We're going to get in the way of that. So this shift that you're doing of the right to clean water, it sounds like that will help position you so that in 2024, if we can get this on the ballot, and by all means, this is a very unifying issue. I don't think we've got many people who don't think that they want clean water. So, if you got public opinion on your side, and we can rally the people to help support the work that you're doing, this actually would be framing that would allow it to move forward and empower people in spite of this first experience we had out of the gate in Orlando or Orange County, correct?
Right. So
Yeah.
the existing framework is such that you have to get somebody to think like you, and you need their permission or approval. The ballot initiatives bypass that. You take it right to the people. The people decide what the language of their protection is going to be. They decide that they want to put it on a ballot, and the people then vote and put it in place.
Excellent.
It's recapturing the democratic process at its basic level, right? And we have a guaranteed constitutional right to do this process. In any town, there's 412 chartered towns in the state of Florida, and 2 people can form a political action committee to create this language and do this for each of those 412 towns. They just have to go do it. Florida Rights of Nature Network, we have the template, we have the language. We currently have a successful initiative in Titusville. They collected their 1,400 signatures. Some of the city commissioners were going to defeat it, but they got so many people in the room that they felt the political pressure to put it on the ballot. So in this November, the people of Titusville will have the option to grant themselves the legal right to clean water, the first in the United States. And we can bring the awareness to that. We feel just confident, just like in Orange County, everybody is going to, it's an easy sell. I mean, if you're not for clean water, you're against clean water, right? So who's going to pull that lever? Nobody's going to pull that lever. Right.
Yeah.
So we're pretty confident that we can get this done in Titusville, and it's being watched internationally and nationally. This whole process and the law, the language is being watched. And now, once we were defeated, and we decided to move to this human civil right, and the reason for that is a human civil right cannot be preempted. It's indefeasible. It's innate. You can't preempt that. So we were going to try to do this again from a grassroots level in each one of these small towns. But because of the political winds in Tallahassee, we decided to push forward and go full bore for a state constitutional amendment. We need 900,000 signatures. This is no easy feat. We've met with other amendment groups, and these amendment campaigns are like a political campaign. They cost millions of dollars, and we need vast awareness and support. But again, if anybody wants to do it locally, they can do it locally as they support the state initiatives.
So go ahead and just tell everyone where they should go to get more information and donate or volunteer to help get signatures, because these signatures need to be in person, right? We can't just do online signatures. So you need people to be able to knock on doors wherever they're at and collect signatures in their areas, correct?
Yes. So the Florida Rights of Nature Network has in Florida, the right to clean water.org, it's Florida right to clean water.org. We have an ambassador program where people can join us. There's no obligation to join, but it just gives you more of the updated information. But we have boots on the ground all across the state. We have kids going out and collecting hundreds of signatures. Or you can support it with a financial, monetary donation. We have businesses that are now have kiosks in their stores to bring awareness to the petition.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. That's a great idea.
We've been able to raise enough money to have billboards in that Titusville area. We're focused on it because we want to be successful in Titusville. So we now have electronic billboards around the county there. So bringing the awareness is the important part. Raising the signatures really takes an army. We're trying to raise funding for paid petition gatherers. This is an expensive process. Just that alone is about $7 or $8 million. And then you have to bring the awareness. Once you've got your signatures and you get it through the Supreme Court review, we've had this language vetted by 3 constitutional attorneys here in Florida, so we think we will survive the Florida Supreme Court review of the language, because they don't particularly review it for content. They review it more for formatting.
Right.
But there's a lot of political wins. The judicial system in the state of Florida is very closely tied to the legislature, although there's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
But they often side with that.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll share information about this moving forward as well. I think that what I would really love to see is that we are able to get this on the ballot in Florida. When we get it on the ballot in Florida, people are going to vote for it. So if we could imagine, if we're able to do that and truly change these systems to have them work to protect everyone, protect our resources, protect our water, then we could see things change. I know we've got to wrap up here, but I did want to put out one final question to the group, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but to imagine into that possibility of getting this on the ballot for the state of Florida, which could be instrumental in helping to raise awareness in other states too. So if we do that, what is the potential for turning the situation around? Cleaning up these algae blooms.
Clearly, the present system is not working. We have environmental laws, but they're not being enforced, or they're not. There's ways in which they're not being used properly, and so on. So you got to try something else.
And that's exactly right. We need to follow. If this is not working, what's the saying that if you can repeat the same thing over and over, it's insanity? We have to try a new paradigm of protections. And rights protections are the highest levels of protections that we can create. And we believe this is probably our last chance. I'm not the only one that thinks that we're nearing a point of no return on water quality in the state of Florida. And if we don't stop inputting the nutrients in there, and we can not hold the state agencies accountable for allowing this to happen, to not do the better management practices, not to do the basin management action plans, BMAPs. These things are toothless. They're unenforced. The constitutional right to clean water will allow us to make the state legislature do their job and the regulatory agencies do the job they're intended to do, to actually protect what they were assigned to do.
Exactly. And I think that the bottom line is that there are better ways to do things. When we started using nitrogen fertilizer, people might not have realized the impacts they were going to have. So let's change the system. There's ways that we can do all of this where we're not harming other industries in order and people and planet in order to support this industry or that industry. So we know that it can be done. And now we just have to whittle away at the legal system and our governing bodies to get them to support the changes that will protect all of us. Thank you for watching Becoming the Change. While researching this episode, I also discovered the roles that seagrass and hemp farms can have in absorbing toxic algae. It has become increasingly clear to me the value that regenerating our natural systems can have in protecting all of us. I think it's time for Floridians to demand that their leaders put climate, protecting their citizens, and protecting our environmental resources at the top of their list of priorities. But regardless of what happens in the next election, all of us can get involved in helping to put the power back into our own hands when it comes to empowering democracy, taking climate action, and protecting our waterways. The right to clean water should be a no-brainer for all of us, yet it is not guaranteed in the current system. If you want to do your part to help protect that right, please do reach out to Florida Rights of Nature Network. You can also help by doing what you can in your own home and at the ballot box. If you want to support more content like this, please go to becomingthechange.us. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Thank you so much. Let's all become the change we want to see in the world together.